Hello, everyone. So we are going to be getting started. So we're going to be talking today about self-harm and suicide prevention. And this is a 101 course for anyone that is 18 years and older. Okay, so before I begin, I want to briefly introduce myself and Association House of Chicago. So my name is Aurelia Gordillo. I am a community health education specialist at Association House of Chicago, which is a nonprofit organization located in the Humboldt Park area. And a little bit more about Association House of Chicago and its mission is to serve a multicultural community by providing comprehensive, collaborative, and effective programs in English and Spanish. We promote health and wellness and create opportunities for educational and economic advancement. Some of the services that we offer are we have a high school, we have behavioral health, child welfare, community health, and then workforce development. And I am part of the community health. So our program offers mental health first aid. So mental health first aid, just like CPR helps you assist an individual having a heart attack, mental health first aid helps you assist someone experiencing a mental health or substance use related crisis. In the mental health first aid course, you learn risk factors, warning signs for mental health and substance use concerns, strategies for how to help someone in both crisis and non-crisis situations, and where to turn for help. And I also want to make sure to let you guys know that this webinar is not affiliated with mental health first aid. But if you are interested in becoming a mental health first aider, we will be offering virtual trainings very soon. So just make sure that you follow us on our Facebook page at Community Health and Workforce Development for any updates, or you can also check out our website, associationhouse.org, if you are interested in mental health first aid or also other services that we offer. Okay, so we are going to get started. What we are going to be talking about today is how common is suicide and self-harm. Also, I'm going to be talking about some of the differences between suicide and self-harm. I'm going to talk about risk factors, warning signs, how to help, and then at the end, I will be sharing some local resources as well as some online resources. So, the difference between self-harm and suicide. The most significant difference between suicide and self-harm is the intent. Individuals who are suicidal are experiencing severe life stressors and or mental health disorders that are causing unbearable pain, and suicide is their way to end this pain. Suicide attempts usually come from a place of despair, hopelessness, and worthlessness. On the contrary, individuals who engage in self-harm do so as a way to cope with their feelings and stressors. Sometimes it's true individuals who engage in self-harm may later die by suicide. Generally, individuals who engage in self-harm do not wish to end their life, but rather engage in self-harm as a way to cope with their life. Individuals who attempt suicide do so with the intent to end their life due to their suffering. Okay, so here are some suicide statistics. So as you can see, this report is from 2008, and it shows that suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the US. In 2008, 48,344 Americans died by suicide, and in 2008, there were an estimated 1.4 million suicide attempts. Also, on average, there are 132 suicides per day. And in 2017, the suicide rate was 1.5 times higher for veterans than for non-veterans, adults over the age of 18 years old. And here are some self-harm statistics. So the average age of the first incident of self-harm is 13 years old. Adolescents have the highest rate of self-injurious behaviors, with about 17% admitting to self-injury at least once in their lifetime. Adults, aside from very young children, adults are the least likely group of people to follow through with self-injury. Only about 5% of adults have self-injured in their lifetime. 45% of people use cutting as their method of self-injury, and about 50% of people seek help for their self-harm, but only from friends instead of professionals. So here are some risk factors for both self-injury and suicidal thoughts and behaviors. Despite the different intentions, there are common risk factors. So here we have history of trauma and abuse and chronic stress, high emotional perception and sensitivity, few effective mechanisms for dealing with emotional stress, feelings of isolation. This can be true even for people who seem to have friends and connections, having history of alcohol or substance abuse, presence of depression and anxiety, feeling worthless. Because of these and other risk factors, the presence of non-suicidal self-injury is in and of itself a risk factor for suicidal thoughts and behaviors. And then, like I mentioned earlier, intoxication, but also more than 1 in 3 people who die from suicide are under the influence of alcohol at the time of the death. Okay, so now we're gonna start off by talking about self-injury, and then I will go on and talk about suicide. So here are some reasons for self-injury. Studies have shown that there are 4 main reasons why individuals engage in self-harm. So one is to reduce negative emotions, to feel something besides numbness or emptiness, to avoid certain social situations, to receive support, social support, a cry for help. So that is a cry for help. And also at the bottom I mentioned, self-harm is typically used as a coping strategy for preserving and enhancing life, not ending one's life. So typically that's what it is. So for some, the pain from self-injury reassures them that they are still in fact alive, especially when they are experiencing emotional numbness or a disconnect from the world. The physical act of cutting or burning induces pain receptors in the body that triggers the brain to feel an adrenaline rush, which can easily be addictive and highly dangerous. So people who self-harm generally hurt themselves in secret. They aren't trying to manipulate others or draw attention to themselves. In fact, shame and fear can make it difficult to come forward and ask for help. Also, I did find a quote online from people who self-harm, and this is a quote that they talked about when it comes to self-harm, and it said, "It is a way to have control over my body because I can't control anything else in my life." So here are some most common types of self-injury. So we have cutting, scratching, burning, carving words or symbols into the skin, hitting or punching oneself, maybe banging one's head on other surfaces, piercing the skin with sharp objects such as hairpins, pulling out the hair, or picking at existing wounds. Then we have signs and symptoms. So some of the signs and symptoms are scars, often in patterns, fresh cuts, scratches, bruises, bite marks or other wounds, excessive rubbing of an area to create a burn, keeping sharp objects on hand, wearing long sleeves or long pants even in hot weather, frequent reports of accidental injury, difficulties in interpersonal relationships, behavioral and emotional instability, impulsivity or unpredictability, statements of um, helplessness, hopelessness, or worthlessness. So now we're going to go and talk about how to help someone, a person who self-injures. If you are a family, a friend, and you want to make sure that having this conversation can be difficult, but you just want to make sure that you acknowledge your own feelings. You might feel shocked, you might feel confused. You also want to learn about self-harm, doing some research online to try to understand it a little bit more. And when having that discussion, you want to take as much judgment out of the discussion. Also, recognize that self-injury is usually a symptom of serious psychological distress. Avoid any negative reactions to the self-injury. So like I mentioned, try your best to take out as much judgment out of that discussion. You want to try your best to discuss the situation as calmly as you can. Focus on ways to stop the distress. Do not focus on stopping the self-injury. Do not trivialize the feelings of or situations that have led to the self-injury. Do not punish the person, and then do not threaten to withdraw from care. If it is a medical emergency, always, if someone has taken an overdose, consumed poison, sustained a life-threatening injury, they are confused, unconscious, disoriented, or are actively bleeding, you call 911 in that moment. In that moment, that's not the right time to talk about why are you doing this, what's going on. You just make sure that they take care of that medical emergency, and then afterwards you can have that conversation with them. So now I'm going to be talking about suicide. I also want to mention some other quick facts about suicide, and these were taken from the CDC. So males take their own lives at nearly 4 times the rate of females and represent 77.9% of all suicides. Females are more likely than males to have suicidal thoughts. Firearms are the most commonly used methods of suicide among males, and poisoning is the most common method of suicide for females. Okay, so now we're going to be looking at some of the warning signs for suicide. So, threatening to hurt oneself, seeking access to means, talking, writing, or posting on social media about death, dying, or suicide. This could also be like sharing pictures or posts about feeling hopeless, feeling worthless, also acting recklessly or engaging in risky activities, feeling trapped, increased alcohol or drug use, maybe withdrawing from friends and family or society, demonstrating rage and anger or seeking revenge, appearing agitated, and having a dramatic change in mood. Also, when they are feeling hopeless, some statements can be saying things like, my situation will never get better, it is too late now, I will never be happy. Also, I do want to talk about that last point, having a dramatic change in mood. A person may not only show a lower mood, but may show a sudden positive change. So if that person has been feeling down for a very long time and they have not received any professional support or professional treatment, and all of a sudden you see a positive change, this is often not a good sign, because it may be that the person has made the decision to take their life and they are at peace with it. So now I want to talk about some myths. Asking about suicide will put the idea in the person's mind. Another myth is someone who talks about suicide isn't really serious. But the fact is that talking about suicide may be a way for the person to indicate just how bad he or she is feeling. If the person has shown signs of suicide, it is important to ask the following questions. You want to make sure that you ask, are you having thoughts of suicide, and are you thinking about killing yourself? Now again, asking these questions can be very uncomfortable, but they are very important. If you ask these questions and then they say yes, you wanna follow up with these questions. Have you decided how you're going to kill yourself? Have you decided when you will do it? Have you collected things you need to carry out your plan? These will tell you the severity of the situation, so a higher level of planning indicates a more serious risk, but also an absence of a plan does not ensure that the person's safety. All thoughts of suicide must be taken serious. So now we're going to go into how we can talk to a person who is suicidal. So this conversation can be very difficult, but you want to be aware that your response will have a big impact on how the conversation goes. So you want to let the person know you are concerned and willing to help. You want to discuss your observations with the person. You want to ask the questions without dread or without any force, like forcing it. Do not express any negative judgments. You want to appear confident, and as this can be reassuring. Also, making sure of having maybe being open, like not having your arms crossed, having good eye level, good eye contact, maybe sitting next to each other, sitting in a quiet place. And you want to be aware of maybe cultural differences. And then you want to check for two other risks. Has a person been using alcohol or other drugs? And has a person made a suicide attempt in the past? Keeping the person safe. So you want to make sure that you provide a safety contact number, whether that be maybe their doctor or their therapist, or you can also use a hotline. I will be sharing the Suicide Prevention Lifeline hotline at the end, as well as other resources. You want to help the person identify any past supports. You want to make sure that you always involve them in any decision making. So, for example, if you are in that situation, and do not go into like another room and call the Suicide Prevention Lifeline. Just ask them, hey, how about we call together? Or how about we call a doctor together? You want to call law enforcement immediately if the person has a weapon or is behaving aggressively. So when calling law enforcement, sometimes it can end. It has, been shown time and time again that sometimes situations don't end well. What you can do is ask for a CIT officer, which is a certified intervention team, and they are trained to deal with mental health crises. Not everyone is certified, but you can call and request for one. Another thing you can do is you can call and just ask for the ambulance to show up by themselves. And again, that is not always granted, just because the paramedics might not feel comfortable and they might want the police to come with them. But those are two options that you can do. Also, do not leave an actively suicidal person alone. Do not use guilt or threats to try to prevent suicide. So do not say things like you're going to go to hell, you're going to ruin other people's life if you die by suicide, and do not agree to keep their plan a secret, because if you say, hey, I'm going to keep your plan a secret, and then you go and tell someone, they might feel like they cannot trust you anymore. So one thing you can do is say, if it has anything to do with hurting yourself or hurting others, I can't keep your secret. So another thing is you want to make sure that we listen non-judgmentally. Listening non-judgmentally is more than just being good at listening. So you want to reflect on your own state of mind. You again acknowledge how you're feeling. Adopt an attitude of acceptance, genuine, and empathy. So making sure that their feelings are valid. Use verbal skills to show that you are listening. So maybe asking questions just so that it can demonstrate concern. Maintain positive body language. So like I mentioned earlier, make sure that you're not crossing your arms, maybe comfortable eye contact, having that open body posture, attentiveness. Also making sure that you maybe put your phone on silent, or you turn it over, you're not checking your phone, checking your emails, because then that's going to show that you don't have time to have a discussion with that person. And again, you want to recognize the cultural differences. Also, giving reassurance and information. So you want to treat the person with respect and dignity. Understand the symptoms are an expression of distress or part of an illness. You want to make sure that you do have realistic expectations. Offer consistent emotional support and understanding. You want to give the person hope for recovery. Provide practical help and offer credible information. Also making sure that you do not blame or say things like you're weak. And then here are some things that are not supportive. So telling the person to snap out of it, acting hostile or sarcastic, blaming the person for symptoms, maybe adopting an over-involved or overprotective attitude, nag the person to do what they would normally do, trivialize the person's experiences, belittle or dismiss the person's feelings, speak with a patronizing tone or talking to them like if they were a child, and do not try to cure the person. Okay. So you want to make sure that you also encourage appropriate professional help. So offer the person to connect them with a professional, encourage the person to not give up on seeking professional help. If you don't know exactly where to go, one good place is to go with your primary care provider because then they can connect you with other resources. And then we have self-help. So we have this alone might not be helpful, but with including with professional help and other supports, this can also be helpful. So exercise, relaxation and meditation, peer support groups, self-help books based on cognitive behavioral therapy, family, friends, faith, and other social networks. So here we have the resources. If it's an emergency, you want to make sure that you always call 911. And like I mentioned earlier, you can request for a CIT officer. So a CIT officer is someone who has been trained to deal with mental health crises. And or you can request just for the ambulance to show up. And again, it's not always granted for either or. You want to call, oh, here we have the SAMHSA Disaster Distress Helpline. We also have the text line. We have the crisis text line. If someone, so for the text lines, is for people that might not feel comfortable talking, they can text. I also have the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. I have the Autism Response Team, as well as at the bottom, I do have the NAMI website and then the NAMI Chicago website, just because this website can connect you with support groups, local resources, as well as more information on mental health. Or maybe if there is something that I didn't touch upon, you can go on their website. They have a lot of information on mental health. And then here are some local resources. These are more towards the northwest side of Chicago. So we have Association House of Chicago, we have Community Health, we have the Lotus Center, we have Chicago's Children's Center for Behavioral Health, we have Youth Service Project, we have Casa Central, Old Irving Park Community Clinic, and then we have La Casa Norte. Here are some references, the websites that I was able to use to create this PowerPoint today. If you're interested, you can click on them and read upon them. So thank you so much for joining me today. Have a great day.